Well, it's a little after dinner time where I am, and well, Gilles just had his first coffee, but it's much earlier than I would normally ever have a coffee in Chigny-les-Roses, which is very close to the city of Reims in Champagne, kind of the center of the Champagne region in France, where we are joined by our friend Gilles Dumangin, or sorry, yeah, Gilles from Dumangin Winery. Gilles, it was the fourth generation. How long has your family been in the champagne business now?
And fifth, actually. We started in 1884 making champagne. Hi, everyone. We actually started growing grapes in 1520, so a very long time ago. And then my great grandfather decided to start making champagne in 1884 in the village. So I'm the fifth generation following up from great granddad, granddad, and my father and myself 25 years ago.
I love that you know that the family has been in at least the grape growing trade for half a millennium. All I know is that my ancestors are Scottish Irish, going back 300 to 400 years, but there's the roots. To try to find those roots would be almost impossible.
But where we are here, it's like it's different. I mean, we live in the same village for most of our lives. I've actually lived abroad and been plenty of places, but I've never moved my passport address. It's always been the winery. I've lived here all my life. So you're sitting right now in my new tasting room, which used to be the kitchen where my mother would cook meals for us as kids. And the computer where I'm talking to and pointing to is actually where we were having the dinners and everything. So it doesn't seem to move much here compared to the rest. So
Yeah, no, I get it. Well, I'll have to come check out the new tasting room. I'm coming over for Whiskey Live Paris, so I'll try to plan to have an afternoon or something to come pay you a visit, as long as you're not in the middle of harvest.
And we don't know this year. It might start early, might start late. The harvests have been pretty erratic over the last few years, but earlier and earlier, probably because of increasing temperatures in the world. But I've actually been harvesting 6 times in August in 25 years, and my grandfather, who passed away in 2003, never did one harvest in August. However, this year is very, very wet, and we haven't got a clue. We've bloomed late, the vineyards bloom late, and so we're thinking 15th of September for the start date. So when Whiskey Live, I think Whiskey Live is 27th or something like this.
Yeah, it's towards the end of September this year.
Yeah, so it's better. I might actually be able to make it this year.
Well, there you go. Well, and as much as I know you're having some struggles over there, I don't know if you heard about the situation in the wine growing region in British Columbia, but they had such a bad winter cold this year that it's destroyed, I think, more than half the vines. So,
Wow.
yeah, a lot of them are going to have to start from scratch.
What temperature did they get down to?
I don't know for sure, but I mean, there was a cold spell where in Alberta, a few hours drive away, about 5-6 hours away, it was minus, like high minus 30s. And I think it held for over a week, and that's what did them in.
Yeah, that happened to us in 85. I was a kid going to college then, and we had a bad spell between minus 20 to 30 for over a week. And they've actually counted that half the vineyard had to be replaced within a space of 5 years because we're so cold, as you said, for a period of time that the vineyards actually froze and couldn't be revived. But at the time, we are going to school. Now, if you put minus 30 here in France, nobody goes to school. But at the time, we're still going to school every morning, walking. As a difference of times.
Absolutely. So your family makes champagne. It's been making champagne now for 5 generations. One of the other things you do, which is a style of fortified wine that's unique to the Champagne region, is Ratafia Champenois. And the reason I want to talk about this well, and we're actually going to try a couple of them tonight, is because the whole premise of your whiskey operation, you're a fan of whiskey as well too, is that you mature Ratafia in your own casks and then you use those casks to finish whiskey. And you know, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Ratafia, and then maybe also while we're trying that, then you can tell us a little bit about how you went from making Ratafia to deciding to mature whiskey in Ratafia casks.
Well, Ratafia is a style of, well, it's not a wine, it's not a spirit, it's a liqueur. It's actually, technically, it's called a mistel, Mistelle. And originally, it was a way to preserve fruit and fruit juice for, when they had nothing. So to preserve it in no fridge, no nothing. And so this is a new 3-liter bottles, by the way, for restaurants and things. I'm going to try to accompany you, but it's a bit early for me to drink. So Ratafia is actually just fruit juice from champagne and spirit made from champagne from the same fruit juice that is transformed into a spirit the years before. So it's actually the more fruity the juice, the better the Ratafia is. I don't know if you've heard of Pineau des Charantes, Magvin du Jura, Pommeau de Normandy. There's many of these drinks around Western Europe where we couldn't actually preserve fruit another way than doing this. Originally, it was used on long sea voyages between France, Spain, England, and the Americas. And that was the only way to avoid scurvy on boats. They need vitamin C on boats. And because this way of making the drink is preserving all the vitamins of the fruit juice, you could have actually a lot of vitamin C on board. And actually the name comes from that period as well, where the French, the English, and the Spanish would fight over territories. And then when they decided to sign the peace, the only drink they had to ratify the peace was that particular drink. So you could find Ratafia in Burgundy, in Barcelona, Catalan, but Ratafia Champenois is the only one that has a protected geographical indication in France. We fought hard to be able to have this drink recognized within the industry and to raise the quality. And so what you have here is, in this particular Ratafia, the first one, Craft, that you're trying. By the way, this is the style of glass that I use to be able to drink the Ratafia. I do not put it into the fridge because it's better expressed if you have all the temperature that raise and bring all the fruit to the surface. This one is actually made of 2/3 Pinot Meunier, which is a very fruity grape, and 1/3 Pinot Noir, which has a bit of strength and structure. And so it stays in barrel. That's what Andrew was mentioning before. I've got about 300 barrels of craft Ratafia in store everywhere. It stays a minimum of 6 years and an average of 9 in barrels before we get it. So this one is a blend between a lot of different vintages of Ratafia. And so there's a lot of fruit expression in the Ratafia. It's a very versatile drink. You can actually share it with a lot of different dishes. When I was a kid in Champagne, we used to have take a melon, a Charantes melon, and then we would scoop out the seeds and then fill up the middle of the melon with the Ratafia and knead that with the French version of prosciutto. And so you'll have all the smokiness of the meat, you'll have the fruit of the Ratafia, you'll have the woodiness, and so that's a very good things to go together. In this particular one, you really have a lot of wood expression. I have a lot of different other expressions of Ratafia, a pure Chardonnay, a pure Meunier, a pure Pinot Noir. This is the Saignée Rosé one. And the next one that we're going to taste after, that you're going to taste, because I'm out of bottles. I've got 5 bottles left and I'm not opening them. actually 6, counting that one. But Ratafia is really a drink that has a lot of potential, a lot of expression. In coming to how I came out doing whiskies, actually, when I was a student, I used to live in London, hence the accent when I speak English. I used to buy a lot of whiskies a bit everywhere. And about 30 years ago, I stumbled upon a bottle of Glenmorangie called Tin l'Hermitage Finish, 1978 vintage. I'm pointing there actually because I've had a bottle that I found online in Germany, which I bought a few years ago for close to €1,000. And I had it framed in my office, a new bottle of the one that I bought 30 years ago. I have it framed so I cannot take it out of the actual framing thing. So even if I'm drunk with my friends, I can't actually access that bottle and drink it. But that bottle was made with, it's called Tin l'Hermitage Finish, and it was made with a barrel of Northern Côte d'Ivoire wines, so bringing a lot of tannins to the whiskey. Now, not a few of you probably do not appreciate, yeah, exactly this one. A few of you would probably not appreciate the finish of red wine on different whiskies, but actually on Ratafia, that works particularly well. So I have a lot of barrels of Gros Hermitage, Hermitage, really potent Shiraz-based casks that are maturing by Ratafia. And then a few years back, I realized that the barrels that I've had for 15, 20 years were not as good as they were before, providing what I wanted for the Ratafia tannins, because actually, in the Ratafia itself, when we make it, there's not that much of tannin. It's a very, very fruity drinks. But if you want to make it a drink that has more body and more things, then the actual Shiraz-based casks are bringing that. And then after a few years of having several different Ratafias in, they're not as good in providing that to the Ratafia. So I'm a bit of a hoarder myself, so I don't like throwing things away, and I especially don't like throwing good wood away. So I was looking to renew my park of barrels and thinking, what am I going to do with the other barrels? So I actually did a test and thinking, maybe I can do a Ratafia finish, like you have a sherry finish. The sweet wine usually works pretty well on finish of whiskies. And so I went to Whiskey Live, but not the one you're talking about, the one in London. I met a few people there, and I met the managing director of Benrinnes Distillery in Wales, and decided that I could try that out. So this one, my first release, and I don't know if you see the color of these drinks. It's about actually the same color as you have in your glass with the Ratafia. But it's all natural. We don't add anything. When we make our champagne, I try to be as organic as I can. We don't add anything. We don't take out anything. For the Ratafia, this is the same thing. We don't add anything. We don't take anything. And when you look at all the whiskies that we've produced so far, we do not add anything or take anything. So basically, all the colors of all the whiskies is actually the aging that or the finish that I apply that brings a lot of color very, very quickly. So I bought a couple of barrels of Benrinnes, like you do when you want to try out something. And a year later, the result was really, really what I wanted. And you can see the color of that bottle on the screen. It's very reddish hue in the color. And the taste was really, really what I wanted. Because we export everywhere in the world, our champagne are exported in 45 countries. I decided to go for a more worldwide approach to whiskies rather than going Scottish only. I did obviously some Scotch. I have plenty of them. You can see all the collection of what we've released in the last 4 years. But that's how it came about, really, from a fluke. trying to change my barrels, and then not wanting to throw them away, so keeping them as they are. So.
Before we go on to the 16 year, can you tell us a little bit about Ratafia, as far as like if you open a bottle, how long does it stay fresh? Things like that,
Well,
that people may not know.
Basically, Ratafia was a preserving mechanism for fruit. So it's actually preserved fruits, and it preserves itself. There's quite this is not a diet drink, by the way. You've got in the craft, you've got about 120 grams of sugar per liter, all natural sugar from the grape. And so it's spent so long in barrels already that it had all its time to do its own oxidation. And so the level of alcohol and the level of sugar will preserve it for, as you know, obviously it's the same as a whiskey. It doesn't improve after the bottle is open, or if you keep the bottle for 20 years, it's not going to get better in a bottle. However, when you open it, obviously, if you have that left in the bottle, that will oxidize more than if the bottle is now full. But as a general rule, when you open it, you can keep it for 2, 3, 4 years. You don't have to drink it on the same night. Well, you can if you want, but you don't have to drink it on the same night. And it can stay open for a few years before having any issues with the actual drink. So don't put it in the fridge, but if you keep it in your cupboard outside of sunlight, like you would do for any of your good drinks, then you're pretty guaranteed to have a good Ratafia afterwards. So
Something to enjoy for a while. That's great. So the craft Ratafia, roughly 6 years maturation. The 16-year-old,
no, roughly 9 years
roughly 9
maturation.
years.
Yeah, minimum of 6, but roughly on an average, you've got a 9-year drink, but 6 years minimum. Now, the second one is absolutely unique. So you've got a bottle that is actually not framed, but here. So the one that you have on your screen is actually where one of the flukes happened. While I was testing out the process for the pendering, I had to empty a barrel, and I didn't have another barrel to put the content of the original Ratafia that was in. So I decided to put that in a 250-liter stainless steel container that I have here. And I forgot to put what was, so to write down what the content was. And so a few months pass, and then I go back to the tank room, and then, so what's that? Didn't mark down what it was. So I tasted it, and I said, well, that's really, really good. So rather than putting it back in barrel or in the blend of the craft, this is when I decided to bottle it on its own. And it was so good that I decided to present it to, a few places everywhere. And this is the Ratafia that had the most praise, not only mine, but the Ratafia Champenois over the global market that had the most praise everywhere. It was voted in 2020 as best Ratafia in the world. It has a lot more nuttiness. So this one has actually stayed 16 years in a barrel of red wine, and has developed much more complex taste than the first one. Definitely not something you want to put in the fridge, this one, really, really. To be appreciated on its own. I've got 5 bottles left of this one. It's 1 barrel only. It was made from the harvest 2004. We cannot vintage Ratafia because in Europe, we've got a law that says that anything, whether wine or whatever, that has more than 8% of another vintage cannot be called a vintage on the label. And the spirit that we use cannot be made the same year as the juice that we use for the Ratafia, because the juice is obviously very fragile, and we have to mute it with the alcohol, with the spirit, very quickly. We're talking a day after pressing and letting the sediment settle at the bottom of the tank. And then we have to mute it straight after, because if not, it would lose all its nice properties of vitamin C and everything, and it would turn into oxidation. So this one, 16 years in a barrel. This is the first of the series. It's called single barrel because it's out of stock. Since then, released in 2003. 18 years in a barrel, which was also voted best Ratafia in the world in 2022. And I'm currently going through my batch of all barrels to find the single barrel edition 3, which will be released in 2025.
Wow. Did you have, like, before you started your project to make whiskey, were you already thinking about maturing Ratafia longer and leaving it longer in cask? Because you said this is not something that's particularly common.
It's not common at all. Most Ratafia producer usually age their Ratafia for a maximum of 3 years. It's just when I started, I had I wanted to replicate the Ratafia that my grandfather did. But I started making Ratafia in 2000, and my grandfather passed away in 2003. My dad didn't make any Ratafia at all, so that skipped a generation. And so I didn't have a book recipe on how to make it. So I started to make it in 2000, tasted it in 2001, not good enough, tasted it in 2002, not good enough, 3, not good enough, 4, not good enough. So I actually released about 6 years after I started making it, because I really wanted a good, a good drink to sell to people and to share with my friends. And so I had also a different approach where most Ratafia producers are doing what they call the Solera finish, where every year they have only 3-4 barrels of Ratafia. And every year they scoop a bit of the top of the barrel, which they blend together, and then they put new Ratafia in. The issue with that approach, not an issue, it makes very good Ratafia if you like that kind of thing. But it's when you've blended in your barrel, you cannot go back. You don't have access to the original Ratafia that was in your barrel. Me, I had a different approach. I started making Ratafia in 2000, and then kept it on its own. Then made Ratafia in 2001, kept it on its own in different barrels. So now I actually have access to 25 or 24 years of different vintages, each of them in their own barrel. I don't fill them up with new Ratafia, so the level goes down year by year. Less than whiskey, because the evaporation rate for Ratafia is much lower. The alcohol and the sugar kinds of bind together, and so you lose some liquid, but you lose a lot less liquid than you would do when you have a much higher alcohol content, which is volatile. And so I had no idea that I was going to age it that long. I just believed in the quality of the product. So I started making more, up to the point that I'm now, when I've got the biggest library of old Ratafia in Champagne. Since I've released this one, I think I've released this one in 2021. No, 2020. Since I've released this one, then all the other producers have started making Ratafia to put aside and age, because they realized that it was really good that way. However, I got 20 years of advance compared to the others, so I really have a library of very old Ratafia to play with.
Cool. Well, they're both lovely. I think you can definitely see the advantage of time. The younger one's got a bit more acidity to it. It's fruity, it's sweet, but the older one, you're getting those nice oxidative notes. It's more nutty. It's got a lovely profile to it. I am not drinking it out of a big wine glass. I suppose I probably should be, but yeah.
It's like any wine. If you have the glassware is obviously very important in any whiskey and wine. it's a fairly new thing for me to drink it out of that type of glass. This is the glass that I actually selected for the Ratafia, and actually now I add all my champagne in that type of glasses as well, because I've started tasting my champagne in this. Usually for champagne, I used not a very small flute like there's a big debate on glassware. Do, do you?
Yeah, we can see it
Here?
against the tile. Yeah.
Okay. And so this glass for champagne is very good because actually it's not a flute straight, and so you've got a sort of tulip shape where the champagne can express itself. So it still keeps the bubbles because of the tulip shape. It keeps the bubbles in, but it also gets all the flavors out of the champagne when you and nose is much better. But since I've started drinking this, so this is now reserved only for private customers who come here because this is a bit more expensive glassware and you pour more. So I use these for professional tastings here and for my own tastings. But this is much better for champagne as well. You've got, it's unforgiving as well. So if the champagne has the slight issue, which is not the case in my champagne, but if you drink a champagne that is not that good, then this glass is really unforgiving. It's the same for Ratafia and for every other thing. So, but it really has a chance to express itself. You get more flavors out of it, and even the taste is different. I've made a taste, especially with the rosé champagne, which I'm a specialist of. I don't know if you can see everything is pink here, but for champagne, if you drink champagne out of if you pour champagne into 4 or 5 different glasses, you not only get a different nose, but you get a different taste when you taste the champagne. And for my rosé, I've actually selected a very old Burgundy type glass, so very wide base and a slight inclination at the top as well, where you get the best taste out of it. Actually, the Zalto Old Burgundy is one of the best glass to drink good rosé champagne. Anyway, but for the Ratafia, this glass is better. Ratafia doesn't need that much aeration. It's spent so long in barrels that it doesn't need that much aeration compared to champagne. So.
Why don't we dive into whiskey, Gilles?
Yep.
One we're going to start with is the Invergordon, a single grain whiskey. I believe this is your second single grain. You did one,
Yes.
Scottish single grain anyway.
Yes, I did. The first one I did was a canvas. I have to admit that before starting making finishes on whiskies, I was not really aware of the potential of single grain, which is usually very different profile, obviously, than single malt whiskies. And my knowledge of single grain was very limited. And when you buy whiskey in Scotland, compared to when you buy whiskies from everywhere else in the world as bulk for independent bottler that I am, you don't really have a chance to taste them prior to buying them. You could, but it's much more common to buy whiskey with the name of the whiskey, and you buy a number of liters and alcohol content, and that's it. So I bought my first single grain, which was Combus 1993. It was a 26-year-old whiskey. And when I tasted the sample after buying the whiskey, I didn't really like what I bought. So I said, well, and I tried actually to resell it before trying to bottle it. And then I put it in a Ratafia cask anyway, because I didn't manage to resell the Ratafia. And I think the single grain is actually the Ratafia finish on my whiskeys. Single grain is the one that actually has the best aspect to it. The grain is much more easy to influence than a malt whiskey. And so if you put the Ratafia finish on a single grain whiskey, it works much better than. So the idea, let me show you something. This is a part of a style from, I need to approach, actually. I don't know if you can see that better. Where am I? Yeah. So this is one that has been used to make a rye whiskey. And I don't know if you can see, but here you got about 5 millimeters. This is originally, this is a red wine barrel, which I used to re-age my Ratafia in, and the wine has a density close to water. So when it goes into the wood, it goes very, very little into the wood because it satisfies the wood and the wood is waterproof. So you got about 5 millimeters worth of black there, which is the limit where the wine has been. Then when you put the Ratafia in, the Ratafia has a much higher density. And so it's very difficult to nourish the wood with the Ratafia. So most of my Ratafia barrels would leak at some point or another. But you can see the waves here in the, I don't know if you see actually, but you can see the waves here where you've got different colors, and the Ratafia will penetrate the wood up to the top. And wow. So the old barrel is actually very weak. You have to be very careful with the barrels because it's full of liquids. All the wood is full of liquids. As soon as you put a whiskey in, the whiskey has a density that is much lower than water. So the density of water is 1,000. Density of Ratafia is like 115. 1,150. And the whiskey is usually around 9,900. And so because of the density, the whiskey is actually sucking everything that's in the wood. And so the color that I get on my different whiskeys, it goes very, very quick because there's sort of sucking effect of the everything that's in the wood goes straight into the whiskey. So I get very, very good colors. The single grain works really well with that type of finish. It brings very lovely notes. I mean, Andrew, you can actually probably talk more about the taste profile and things than I do, because me, I'm more a producer type where I see what I like. But
it's interesting. I mean, the reason I asked about it because I remember the Cambus, and of all the first ones that we got in Canada, without trying it, I was least interested in the Cambus because it was a grain. It was 20 something, and I enjoyed grains, but it generally liked 30, 40, 50-year-old refill cask grains. But it blew me away, and I'm you know, I have to admit, we have so many whiskeys in our store. We often can't try them as quickly as we'd like to, and I'm not sure that I've even written a tasting note up on this one yet, because I think it would have stuck with me more if I had, because it's got a lovely profile to it. The nose is you know, kind of one-dimensional in that it's fruity and sweet, but then when you get to the palate, you have this nice mix of spices, of fruit. The sweetness of the grain and the sweetness of the cask kind of merge together really beautifully in this too. And it's got some nice layers to it. This is a lovely whiskey. Nice richness to it, quite spicy and fruity on the palate. Yeah, I quite like this. You know, once again, I mean, kind of impressed by how good it is. Granted, this is an older grain too. I mean, what are we talking here?
6-year-old.
Yeah. Where is my, I think it should have it on the website. 34 years old, 36 years at the time it was bottled. 13 months in Ratafia casks, and I think it works nicely. Can you talk a little bit about the strength when you're getting a cask of Invergordon? What would the ABV of that be? I mean, I know they can be all over the map, but are you putting it into your Ratafia casks at the strength you get it?
Well, yes, all the whiskies I buy, in bulk, then they all go at the same strength that I buy them at in barrels. I don't reduce before putting it into the barrel. For the old grains, I prefer to bottle them cask strength rather than dilute them. The profile is good that way, and I've never seen any point in diluting it at all. But then again, I buy grain that are 20, 25 years old, a bit more. And so they're already quite reduced anyway. So when I buy grain, it's usually around the 52, 54. The fact of putting it into a Ratafia barrel, you lose 1 or 2% of alcohol straight away because they suck the Ratafia so much that the alcohol level decreases. But usually they arrive at the end around the 50 mark, and this is when I bottle. Generally, I don't like bottling anything at cask strength, but for the grains I do. I have also released a barrel of bourbon, which will arrive in Canada in the near future at cask strength. But all my other whiskeys actually dilute, and I dilute depending on the profile that I want to achieve. But for the single malt, everything I buy is around the 55 to 60 mark. Some of them a tiny bit higher, especially in the case of Balcones, which has a tendency to provide very high proof type juices. But it all depends really. Obviously you can see what I have behind me. We have a lot of different profiles for the different whiskies, and they all come at different alcohol level. But usually my preferred bottling is around 46, 48. That allows me to, well, they're all single barrels, by the way. Everything that I have is a single barrel of each different whiskies. And so I cannot afford to cold filter the whiskey because obviously I would lose too much out of the content. Plus, I know what cold filtering does because we have to do cold filtering on champagne. And this is a necessary evil to be able to have the champagne to not precipitate in the bottle when you put it in the fridge. But the issue with that is you lose, say, 2-3% of the taste of the champagne when you do that. You have to do it, but if you do it, then you lose some taste profile of the champagne. So that would be the same for the whiskies. So I prefer to keep it to not cold filter. And if you don't cold filter, you have to have a higher proof because if not, the fat of the whiskies will manifest in your glass and the whiskey would become hazy. So anything below 46, not cold filter, would be very hazy. It's nothing bad about it. It's just the clearliness of the whiskies will not be there and would be a deterrent on shelves of being purchased. But the decision on which level of alcohol I bottle at really depends on the taste profile. When as I said, Scottish whiskies, I don't really taste before buying. I buy. If I get a sample when the cask is moved to a warehouse that I work with. If I like the whiskey, then I send a barrel of Ratafia to be put in Scotland with my whiskey that I bought. If I don't like, then I resell the whiskey to another broker. If I don't like the profile of the thing that I bought. For all the other whiskeys everywhere in the world, what I do is I've got a very clear routine where I get about 10, 15, 20 different samples in. And then everything is tasted blind. I start tasting cask strength. So some of the whiskeys that would be 62, 63. And then taste, nose, taste, finish. And then I start diluting all of the whiskey. So I don't know what I'm tasting. Well, I do know because I know what I got as samples. But I could have a grain from one region, from another. I could have two peated whiskies. I could have whatever. But they are in nondescript order with just numbers. And then this is how I make the decision of purchasing. And then I dilute bit by bit until I get to the wood. I'm a very big wood lover, which is the reason why I never wanted to actually throw my barrels away. And I decided to do a finish. And so when you dilute to the end, then you get the taste of the actual wood, the barrel. And if that wood is good and the whiskey profile I like, then I purchase. If there is an issue with the wood, it can never be corrected. You cannot correct bad wood if the whiskey has been put into a barrel that had an issue, then this is not correctable. You cannot correct a whiskey that has been badly matured before, even if the strength of the whiskey would fool you at the beginning with nice aromas. But if you go down to the wood, then if it's not good, I don't purchase.
Let's move on to the Bushmills. Now we put this in the lineup, and then we had a bit of a run on it. So it's the only one in tonight's tasting that is unfortunately sold out. So this is Bushmills. It's single malt Irish whiskey. It's a little on the young side, but it obviously kind of caught people's attention. So how did this cask come about? I mean, we wouldn't think that Bushmills would normally be one of the easier distilleries to purchase a cask from.
Well, actually, I didn't purchase this from Bushmill. I purchased this from. I was trying to get Irish is very much in demand right now, and the prices of Irish whiskies have increased so much recently. And I got a guy who has, most of the distilleries. Sorry, let's go back 2 things. So if you try and, as an independent bottler, to buy Irish whiskey, this is not an easy feast. You've got Kool-Aid that is selling most of the stock that you would find on the market. And you've got Bushmills that is selling another part of what's on the market. And most of the distilleries that you see coming out, or the whiskey is coming out of Ireland, is actually not distilled by these actual distilleries. They're all starting distilleries, and they're giving you count age of 14 years old, 12 years old, 15 years old, which they haven't produced because they've just started. And so, pardon me, there's actually a big bulk market in Ireland, and I managed to find a small distillery that wanted to sell me as gin, and I was not interested in gin. So I said, can you find me a few barrels? I said, we've just bought a few barrels of Bushmills and this. What Bushmills? And he said, yeah. I said, you want one? So he probably made a very nice profit on the whiskey that he sold to me. And I thought I would never be able to call it Bushmills. Because obviously I didn't buy it from the Bushmills distilleries direct. And when you are an independent bottler, there's plenty of red tape that you have to go through with a lot of different administrations. And in case of Irish whiskies, the way it works is I have to send my barrels over to Ireland because everything has to be done in Ireland in terms of aging. So you can, if you send bulk whiskey abroad, it can be bottled as Irish whiskey, but it cannot be re-aged into wood after leaving Ireland. So I sent 2 barrels of empty barrels of Ratafia into Ireland, and then I had to register with the Irish whiskey authorities and register the labels that I was going to be using on the whiskey. So because I got them back in bulk in plastic container back to France after they finished their aging. So I sent the label with the name Bushmills on it to the Irish authorities for the label to be approved. And to my surprise, they say, yes, you can use the Bushmill names. So because I'm so small, and this one was 282 bottles, pardon me, it's early in the morning.
Mhm.
Because it was only 282 bottles, then I never had issues with the people making Bushmills. But I had a few running with some people working at Bushmills where they said, you cannot use the name Bushmill. I said, well, you can sue me, but I don't have any bottles left. So,
Yeah.
it's only 280 bottles, but it worked really well. But I don't think I will be able to pull that one off again.
No, it's got a really nice profile to it on the nose. I find Bushmills single malt often has this nice waxy strawberry Twizzlers note to it, and that works really well with the Dumangin with the Ratafia casks. On the palate, it's got a richness to it and a profile that I think gives it the feel of a whiskey older than it actually is. I mean, this was a relatively young whiskey, like 6 years
Yeah.
of age, but it doesn't drink young. It's got nice character to it. It's got a nice body to it. It's elegant, and sadly, it's all gone. This is not one you can have. Bushmills triple distilled Irish single malt. I mean, there's a bit of that barley in there. I think you wouldn't see this if this was much older. You wouldn't be able to find that barley note in the spirit, but it's such a very fruity profile of spirit, and I think it works really well with the Ratafia.
Well, if you want to do pre-orders, I've got another 6 bottles left. So on your next shipment, if someone wants it, I can add a case of 6.
Well, we'll put the feelers out there for that one. I mean, that one we probably would take because we're completely out of it. They're gone, and yeah, but we can't get any more. But I love the finish on that. It's really bright. There's actually a nice acidity to it, which I know is not something we talk about a ton in whiskey. But I really like that. It's well-rounded, great profile. You talked before, this is not cask strength. Um, do you like, I know most of them are at about 48, but do you sometimes tinker with them up or down depending on how you find they're drinking?
Yes, I do. And uh, I do that just prior to bottling. But I like to, uh, it's much more difficult to, sorry, when it's just out of the barrel, and if you taste at the barrel, then I always feel that I have a different feeling than if I take a full 70 centiliter bottle out of the barrel, leave it to settle for about a fortnight, and then taste it again. I have a different feeling than when I taste it out of the barrel. Plus, I'm much more precise when I do the dilution to find out what I want. So um, I, I don't dilute for commercial purposes. I don't dilute because I want to make more whiskey out of one barrel. The idea is just to try to find the right mix of flavors just before release. It turns out that, pardon me, I'm going to be back in 2
Yeah,
seconds.
go right ahead, Jules. Have a water. Uh, I'll step in for a moment. Far from that being unique, I know with boutique whiskey, a lot of the whiskeys they do, they now are labeling the ones that are cask strength NCS or natural cask strength. But Sam told me a long time ago that they actually pick what they believe to be bottling strengths, the best bottling strengths for a lot of whiskeys. Oh, Gilles, we may have lost your audio there for a second.
Ah, okay.
No, you're good. You're back. You're back.
I'm
You're
back. No,
good.
no, I took my headphones off to have a cough. I mean, I was not expecting to speak so early in the morning for that so, time.
You
But
can be forgiven for sure.
uh, I found out that most of the whiskeys, their ideal dilution for after the Ratafia finish is between 46 and 49. That's really where I get the best flavor profile out of them. Even with some very strong profiles like the Balcones, which I really like, Texas whiskey, in Balcones, they don't dilute anything. They usually bottle everything cask strength. But I think it's too much. I mean, it also it's too difficult to comprehend. When you get to the 46, 48 mark, then this is where you get the best taste profile out of my range of whiskeys anyway.
Let's move on to the French single malt that's in the lineup, La Piautre. Do you want to tell us a little bit? I think this is a distillery that most people have probably never even heard of before.
Well, the market in France starting to develop a lot in terms of distilleries. We're now at the point actually where we've got too many distilleries in France and plenty of them not producing the quality that is expected out of distilleries. We've had a couple of distilleries going bust this year. Not going bust, but not the owner retiring, and nobody wants to take over because it's too much money to invest into a company. La Piautre is a distillery that is in Anjou, so center of France, close to the Loire Valley. And the name actually comes from the small boats that they use to cross the Loire River, where they used to put barrels of different things to cross the river. And so originally it's a beer company. And they decided to start making whiskeys about 10 years ago. And during COVID, I tasted a lot of French distilleries. And I'd say 80% was a total disaster, some of them completely undrinkable. The big names in France, Ardmore and the likes, they don't like to sell their whiskeys for them to be changed and bottled. They want to keep their identity, which I respect. But La Piautre is one of them that I chose. The profile is, this one is very young, but the profile is oily, very much on the flavor side. So this one is a very, very small company. They must produce probably 20 barrels a year. So this is a very tiny company. But when I tasted this one, I really like the profile. I've got another barrel, but I've decided to age it a lot longer. So this one is 4 years old, so it's a very young whiskey. But in the French whiskey world, this is not a young whiskey, because most of the French whiskeys are released just after 3 years when they can be called whiskey. And so it's quite difficult to find aged whiskeys in France. So the next one I'm going to release out of this one is probably going to be about 10 years old. I'm waiting for it to be released. I've got a couple of other French whiskeys. I got Lemon from Alsace. I got a couple of barrels of that. I've also decided to age a whiskey from scratch from Brittany, because they've got a very different flavor profile over there, close to the sea. A lot of similar type of aging that you would have in Islay. They're not peated, but similar, year coming from the sea for the whiskeys. But this one is really in the middle of France, so nothing to do with that. They grow their own grain, so it's a very, very small operation.
It's got an interesting profile. I mean, you can tell it's a little bit on the young side, but not necessarily in a bad way. It's very earthy. It almost gives you a sense of like the soil of the land it's from. There's almost like a faint touch of manure to it. The Ratafia adds some really nice, big, bright, jammy berry fruit notes to it. A little bit of leather and spice. The palate on it is, yeah, you can tell this is a younger whiskey, but The Ratafia, I think, has added some character to it. It's rounded out some of the rougher edges, and it's very earthy. I mean, there's something almost peaty about it, but it's not peat. It's this very rich, muddy, earthy, mushroomy profile. Sorry, 1 second. Sorry, I had to stop my dog from digging in our couch. Hey, stop it. But yeah, it's got a nice profile. So how do you normally find this particular spirit? Like, does it have a house style?
Well, yes. The second barrel I bought is really, really similar to this one, except it would have a longer period of aging. But it's funny because they're not known at all. And I got a fairly good note by Serge Whiskey Fun on this one. And he never tasted the whiskey prior to tasting it from me. So he actually went around and he bought a couple of bottles of La Piautre to be able to taste them because he never actually heard about them before tasting it from me. So this is really, really, really small operation. But because they do everything themselves, then, as I said, adds to the actual profile is very similar. Your, muddy, earthy style is really what they do, even in their own bottling. But their own bottling is usually lower in alcohol, and I find them a tiny bit weak because of that. I prefer when you get a bit more kick out of it, and the close to 48% that it's been released at.
Yeah. I mean, this one sort of surprised me. Again, I'm a bit of a whiskey snob when it comes to malts, and I'm impressed by like older whiskeys, and quite skeptical of very small distilleries from around the world, whether they're Canadian or French or, German, whatever they be. But yeah, it's got an interesting profile to it. It's clearly a well-made spirit. And Jeff's saying a vintage Ford. No, it reminds me of there's a distillery in Kentucky called Corsair. And this just reminds me a little bit of I'm not a huge fan of American single malt, but I've tried a few bottlings of Corsair that I thought were quite good. And it doesn't taste or smell like Scottish single malt whiskey to me. There's something very distinct about it, but it's good.
What do you think of Balcones then? Because, clearly one of the leader of single malts in the US.
I like Balcones. I don't know that I'm as huge a fan as maybe some others are, because one, we don't see very much of it here. And on the other hand, I like a lot of it is just so heavily peated and so smoky that you can sometimes, I think that peat and smoke can sometimes hide flaws in spirit. And so, I don't know that I have enough frame of reference with Balcones to weigh one way or the other, but I can tell you they're very popular. And anytime we get anything that's come from Balcones from an independent bottler, it doesn't last long.
Yeah, well, I've recently released a Blue Corn and another single malt from Balcones, and the Blue Corn is flying. It's really a very distinctive profile, very different than anything else that you would taste in the whiskey world today.
Yeah, they're unique. Their single malts are interesting, the peaty ones, but I think the problem is, we're in a market that has probably 2,800 whiskey SKUs in it. If something's not here, I just don't have time to try it. I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, it does. It does.
It's not for lack of effort. And even Balcones has reached out to me a couple times to say they're interested in coming up here, and they wanted to fly me down to meet them. But the problem is, their distribution is run by a huge company in the States, and their Canadian branch is just a division of that, and Alberta is a small piece. So to be able to even get their stuff up here is almost bureaucratically impossible. But we've enjoyed the ones we've had from you. Why don't we go to Benrinnes next, Gilles? And I should
Of
mention,
course.
before I say this, I am not normally a Benrinnes fan. It is a single malt that I struggle with a lot. I find it can be very barnyardy. And so I'm interested to see how this one goes. And again, I'm a bit remiss. This one's on sale at the moment. I'm a bit remiss for not writing a tasting note on this. But yeah, tell us a bit about the Benrinnes 2008.
Well, so we moved to single malt Scotch whiskey. These are the most complex for me to deal with administratively because single malt Scotch whiskey is a protected geographical indication of the EU before Brexit. And so everything has to be done in Scotland. So when you buy a single malt whiskey from Scotland and you want to call it single malt Scotch whiskey, you actually have to send your barrels of, if you want to age it specifically in a barrel, if you want to apply a finish, you have to send your barrels to Scotland. Then when the finish is what you think it should be, because it's difficult to taste all of the different whiskies that you have in Scotland. Sorry, my voice is going in again.
No, that's okay. Yeah.
Then you have to request a sample, and then when it's ready for bottling, you have to request another sample, decide on the dilution, and then they do everything for you. They dilute, filter, bottle, label, everything is done in Scotland. So I've actually constructed special pallets because I have a special shape of bottle as well. So I have to send my bottles from France in a special pallet that is like a container that has something in it to ensure that it's not tampered with. And then I ship that pallet to Scotland with my corks, with my labels, with everything. And then they do everything and ship it back to me. So it's a very, very complex administrative procedure every time, and very costly since Brexit, because the cost of import and the cost of taxes that I've had have more than quintupled. They've been multiplied by 5 compared to, so that added a lot of cost. This one was prior to Brexit when it arrived in the winery. I tend to find the single malt Scotch whiskey, especially Benrinnes, is a tiny bit weak before actually applying a finish to it. This one was a bourbon barrel. It was very, very light in color. I mean, close to champagne, really. I mean, the aging in Scotland is very, very slow because of the climate that doesn't move much from winter to summer. So all of the whiskies that I bought in Scotland are very, very light in color. This one was really light in color. And when I started applying the whiskey, the finish, usually I leave them for about, when I started doing this, I used to leave them about a year in a Ratafia barrel before thinking about bottling. After a year, this one didn't have the aroma profile that I wanted. The Ratafia had not kicked in yet. And so I actually left it in the barrel for 2 years. The profile is a bit more, so the Ratafia has brought more to it, more color, a tiny bit more of the sweet side to it and fruity side. And it's funny what you said, because I've got currently I'm working on a Linkwood and a Glenelgin, and it's too profiled. And when you talk to whiskey snobs, like you admit that you are, sorry, you said it, not me. Then this is not type of profile that the whiskey snobs are looking for. Benrinnes, Glenelgin, Linkwood.
But the Ratafia is actually adding a layer of complexity into these whiskies, which is actually making them much more approachable than when you buy the distillery bottling. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, it works really well. I mean, the fact that this was 23 months, I believe, in Ratafia, it's far from like the spirit's definitely not overwhelmed. You can see from the color, it's picked up some color, but it's not, you know, drowning in it. It has a nice balance to it. The Ratafia has either removed or overlaid some of those barnyardy tones that I don't like in some Benrinnes, and it's very drinkable. Yeah, it's got a nice profile to it. Nice spice, some nice fruit tones. It's toasty, a little bit of malt still, but it drinks well. I am surprised though,
You can see,
because sorry, go ahead.
yeah, you can see from the amount of bottles in the barrel as well. This was 347 bottles, which means the ABV prior to bottling was fairly high as well. So uh, one of the reasons that usually Benrinnes is weaker, I think, than other Scottish distilleries is that they bottle at very high proof. They usually, they barrel at very high proof.
Right.
This is to gain space. They bottle at, they barrel at 63.5 or sometimes 67, like Glen Ross does that as well. But I find it's more difficult to apply a Ratafia finish if the original ABV is very high. If you have something that is a tiny bit lower, then you get a better exchange between the barrel and the actual juice.
Mm-hmm. And so if you're receiving, let's say you get a cask of Benrinnes that's mid 60s, would you proof that down before you put it in the Ratafia cask?
No, I wouldn't. I could, but my idea originally when I started making this project of Finnish whiskies in Ratafia barrels,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think I was going to be able to better the whiskies. That was not the idea. I wanted to apply a profile to the juice I was buying. And so my idea is do not change what they've spent years into doing. And so if they do barrel at 65, whatever, then I keep it at that level. And then only the Ratafia is the determining factor when I decide to bottle and dilute before bottling. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't really want to change the style of the distillery. I just want the Ratafia finish to show a different side of that particular juice. That's the idea.
Okay. Let's go on to the Craigellachie, which is a favorite distillery of mine, and I feel kind of an often underappreciated distillery.
I agree.
2007 vintage. What have we got here? 15-month finish in Ratafia Champenois, 48%. Yeah, tell us a little bit about this one here.
Well, funnily enough, this is also one of my favorites. And wherever I would be in the world, if I have nothing good on offer in terms of whiskey on the list, I would go for the 13-year-old Craigellachie, which is
Great
a
choice.
whiskey that to me, this is an ideal dram for the evening. I don't have to think. It's easy. It's flavorsome. And so when I first saw this is the only one I've ever had, and to be honest, it's not a fairly easy whiskey to source, and I haven't seen a second barrel to purchase over the years. If not, I would have purchased it. I really like the lightness of the whiskey, the honey happily tones that you get in the original juice. And so I was really happy that I could actually buy, close to 12 years old at the time, which today in the current world would be impossible because the cost of purchasing 11 or 12-year-old Craigellachie would be in bulk. I mean, would be far too expensive. The cost of bulk has increased so much in the last 5-6 years that it's just being crazy. But this is the profile that I like. I like the fruit tones that you get in Craigellachie. I like the honey that I usually find in Craigellachie. And so because it's one of my favorites in terms of their distillery bottling, then I really wanted to go to the 13-year-old to not to copy, but to match my expectation of what I want when I buy a bottle. So that's why this one is 13. Pardon me. And you can see also that it's got a lower bottle count than the Benrinnes, meaning that it's actually barreled lower than you would into. I don't think so. No, sorry. On top of that, this is a hogshead as well, and
Wow.
the Benrinnes must. I think it was. I know it was a hogshead as well, so you get hogshead and bourbon barrel. You get obviously a very different profile. When you get to a bourbon barrel, you usually get a vanilla that are coming out of it. With hogshead, it's much more neutral.
Yeah.
So you really get the taste of the distillery. And the Ratafia finish just had the sweetness, a bit jammy note on top of the usual tasting profile of Craigellachie.
Yeah. So for me, I find Craigellachie can often be very meaty. Sometimes it's not. And when it's not, it often has this cheesy, funky, fruity profile. And to me, this is more in that cheesy, funky, fruity style of Craigellachie. And interestingly enough, I mean, I think of all the whiskeys we've had so far tonight, this is the one where the Ratafia finish is the light, seems to be like the lightest touch on the spirit, which is in no way a criticism. It's just it's sort of blended so well into it that whereas a lot of these other ones, now knowing what these Ratafia finishes taste like, I might be tempted to guess that. I think with this one, I would have had no idea that this is a Ratafia cask.
Well, it's only 15 months. And I have to be honest, if I want to make a difference to the original juice in a Scottish whiskey that I age in Scotland, then I have to leave it for 2 years. If I leave it for 1 year only, then it's much more difficult to guess what the Ratafia does. It adds a bit of jammy notes to it, but it doesn't go over that. The color has changed dramatically. So I know, there's been an exchange between the barrel and the original juice, because I always get a sample. Pardon me again. I always get a sample prior to put the juice into a Ratafia barrel. This is very important to me so I can see the evolution over time. And this one was, again, refill hogshead, so larger container, 250 liters. And so the juice was really, really, really clear. I mean, but yeah, I don't know if you, no, you do, because if you see the people, the other indies who actually buy whiskey and bottle it straight away, most of the time, their color is very, very light. The color of most of the independent bottler whiskies from Scotland, and that's because they haven't reapplied the finish. But with the finish on Ratafia, you already get that color very, very quickly. After 12 months, you get a very nice hue in the whiskey. They're actually fooling people most of the time because they think they are older than they actually are. And so the color is not really sometimes a question of age, but it's a question of the finish that has been applied. But on this particular one, I think the 12 months or 15 months that I've left it in is why you get less of the Ratafia finish in.
Well, and Gilles, you sort of touched on it, but maybe just to clarify, I think for people here too, I would assume maturation in your cellar in Champagne is probably a little faster than it would be in Scotland. Is that fair to say?
It is fair to say, yes, because we go to extreme temperature here compared to Scotland. As I said, it was 31 degrees outside yesterday, and we easily go down. I mean, it's nothing compared to what you have in Calgary, but we'll easily go down to -10, -15 in winter every year.
Mhm.
So we have a more extreme climate, I would say. It's not extreme, obviously, but a more extreme climate that you would have in Scotland, where basically it's 15 degrees nearly all year round. I'm kidding, obviously, but it would go down to at a small -0, 1, 2, and then the summer would go to 20. So in Scotland, the maturation is really, really constant and very slow. Which is why when you have other whiskies like Balcones, for example, they've got a very dark color straight away because it's more an exotic climate type finish, where it's 8, 9 degrees at night and 50 during the day and every day. So they have a very, very quick spike in temperature, which influences the aging and the exchange in the wood. Basically, a strong spirit is like a thermometer. And so if you warm it up, it expands. If you make it colder, then it retracts. So the exchange with the wood is a lot due to the temperature of outside of the wood. So in Scotland, very slow maturation. In Champagne, quicker maturation, obviously not as quick as you would have in Taiwan or in Texas, but it has an effect, definitely.
Let's jump on to the Ardmore here. So 2009 Ardmore, 48% again, 2-year finishing in Champagne, Ratafia Champenois casks, after initially maturing 9 years in a refill hogshead. And this is the first peated one we have in tonight's lineup as well, too. I'll put this up on screen. So I guess we're going to get a little taste of what peat and Ratafia do together.
Yeah, it's a funny one, actually. I never really thought that strong peated whiskey would work well with sweet finishes. That was a personal view of mine. And then a friend of mine a few years ago, after I started this project, brought me an independent bottler bottling of Kulila, finished in a sherry cask. And I actually loved it. I thought it was really, really nice. And so I started buying a bit stronger peat than the Ardmore. This Ardmore is not one of the highest peated Ardmore that you would find on the market. I guess when they sell juice to independent bottlers, it's when they switch between peat and non-peat. And so rather than completely cleaning their stills and getting from peat to non-peat or from non-peat to peat, they sell all the barrels that are in between that avoids them to wash the stills, and that generates cash by selling juice straight away without having to bottle it. So this is one of them where the peat is very light, or lighter than it would have been into an original Ardmore bottling. But this is what I like pretty much, because I think because it's a gentle peat, the Ratafia actually works really well with it. It works well with higher peat content as well. It tames them. But in this case, actually very well blended. I don't know. What do you think?
To be honest, if I was trying this blind, I would guess this was Kalila. There's something about this. There's something about the mix of the Ratafia and that Ardmore spirit. And I mean, a lot of times Ardmore gets put into old Lefroy casks. I mean, we see a ton of Ardmore matured in ex-Lefroy. Yeah, there's something really interesting going on here. This does not make me think of Ardmore at all. And that's not a criticism. People who take part in this tasting know that I have a bit of a volatile relationship with Ardmore. I find the distillates very inconsistent. I think part of it is the maturation, but that works really well. And interestingly, like the Craigellachie, I think you've got a really nice light touch to the finish there. It's not over the top. I get that it's probably a pain in the ass to send the casks to France, or to Scotland rather, have them filled and matured there and then bottled there. But there's something about that cooler climate aging with the Ratafia spirit that seems to be a little different than it is with the ones that are matured in your cellar. Like it's very
agreed. No, I agree 100% on that. It makes it makes them lighter, in more feminine, with more finesse into it. You know, I think the actual finish makes it easier to recognize. Well, you said you don't recognize Ardmore in there, but it's probably because of the original juice rather than the finish of Ratafia. And it makes them just slightly change rather than completely modify the structure.
Yeah.
So,
Gilles, what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to put a poll up so people can pick their favorite Ratafias. We have a question for favorite Ratafia tonight, but also for their favorite whiskeys. While they're doing that, maybe as a quick intro, because they've arrived, but I'm not going to roll them out. I'm going to roll them out a little bit later. Do you want to give us, or like maybe give any spoilers on a few of the new Dumangin releases, whiskey releases that we're about to roll out here in Canada, which will probably be September. And the reason for that is summer's a bad time to launch new whiskeys, and we want to kind of put them best foot forward. So yeah, tell us a little bit about the ones that we're getting here in let's say.
well, funnily enough, you talked about this Ardmore looking like a Kulila. So one that you're going to get is a slightly, well, actually no, it's the same year. No, sorry. Yeah, the 11-year-old Ardmore, and one that you're going to get in September is the 9-year Kulila, which had a year and a half in Ratafia barrel, 330 bottles, and also this Kulila is not really heavily peated. It's a bit more peated than the Ardmore you just tasted, but it's still on the reasonable side of peat. Then everything else is not Scottish. We have two balconists. Sorry, these are my tasting bottles, so you can't really see the color. Where if I come this side, you might be able to. So this next one, yes, I'm in front of the camera. So the next one will be a single malt from Balconist again. I'm a big fan of Balconist. I don't know if you've seen, but I've released quite a lot of Balconist over the years. So
Absolutely.
this one is a 6-year-old Balconist, which in Balconist terms is a very old Balconist. Diluted to 46.7 and nearly 2 years in a Ratafia barrel. Then this is my first blue corn out of Balconist. This is funny because, well, obviously blue corn is a native species of corn that is grown in Texas, and the flavor is very different than traditional corn whiskey. And I really, really like this the very powerful notes coming out of the corn and how they made that into a whiskey. And I'm also the only independent bottler to have this. I don't think any other single bottling of blue corn has come out of Balconist outside of the distillery. Then This one, I cannot name the distillery because they don't want to, or because they would have sold it to me for a much higher price. But it's distilled in Goa, so you may guess who that
Yeah, we
distillery
can
is.
guess. Yeah.
Yeah, you can guess. Distilled in Goa is a good way of saying provenance. It's a single malt Indian whiskey. It's less exotic. Obviously India, well, Goa, and Bangladesh are two exotic climate type whiskey. This one is less exotic than a traditional distillery bottling of the one made in Goa. It's also 6 years old, with 2 years in Ratafia barrel. The next one is my second version of rye from Sweden, well, Millstone is their commercial name. I know this was a particularly big favorite of your buyers last time we did the Sweden run, which was my first run. This one is much older. The first one I released was 4 years old. This one is a 6-year-old Sweden with about 3 years as well of Ratafia aging. So the last 5 of the range are all 6 years old. As you know, Millstone Sweden is one of the only one that is able to do in the world a rye with 100% rye, and is managing rye is a very difficult cereal to get to ferment on its own. And the Sweden family have been very, very good in providing some of the best wines that you can see in the world. Then the last one of the run-up of 6 that you will receive in September is bourbon. It's also a 6-year-old, so 6-year-old single cask strength bourbon. I like bourbon with a huge amount of rye into them. This one is a 36% rye out of the blend, and it's been a very long time in Ratafia barrel, 52 months in Ratafia barrel, released at 55.2% alcohol.
Wow. Well, thanks for the roundup on that. I'm excited about some of those. And I just looked and realized that, yeah, we do have the blue corn, the Indian, the Dutch, the bourbon, and the Balcones single malt all coming. The Kalila, believe it or not, is already here. We quietly rolled that out, but we'll probably roll it into a tasting with the other 5 new ones in the fall. I'm going to check in really quickly here on the poll. And it looks like all of you, except for one who can vote, have voted. I'm going to give 30 seconds to the last person who has yet to vote, although I suspect their screen's off. They may not be voting. You know what? Let's just call it. Where did I don't know what I did there. I think I closed it. Where is the poll? All right, open that back up.
It's in front of the screen, is it?
Yeah, I'm gonna end
Well,
it
it's in
now.
front of my
Here we
screen.
go. So favorite of the Ratafias was the 16-year. Looks like we lost somebody here since we started this. What's interesting though is for favorite whiskey, it's all over the map here. Bushmills and Craigellachie look like the leaders, but votes for all of the others. And then second favorite, the Ardmore stealing the show there. So some interesting results. I'll share those. I'll put them up on the screen there for a moment for people to see. You can scroll through them yourselves. Those actually match my favorites. I was torn. I quite like the Bushmills, but I think it got edged out of my top 3. If I was going to have to pick 3, be the Craigellachie, the Ardmore, and then the Invergordon grain, which I think showed really well.
For somebody that doesn't really like grain.
Yeah, well, it's not, I mean, it's not that I don't like grain. I don't get excited about it because I've had a lot of very pleasant grain, but a lot of times not a ton of exceptional grain, and it's very good. And I'm going to echo people's sentiments here. I like the Ratafia with further aging. I think that 16-year-old Ratafia shows very, very well. Now, Gilles, I want to thank you for doing this because I know
No, thank you.
it is very early in the morning where you are. And I don't know if you're just going to get your day started now or if you're going to
Yeah, well, I'm approaching my get-up time anyway, so
there you
I
go.
normally up and working at 5, so it's in 22 minutes, so I'm good. I think I'm going to get another coffee and start the day. So,
Sounds good. Well, hopefully it won't be a long one for you. I want to really thank you for doing this tasting with us. I will send you a note. I'm hoping to get out your way in September, October time for a quick visit. But sincere thanks for doing this tasting for us tonight. I hope you have a great rest of your summer. I hope the weather turns around and that you have a good crop. Fingers crossed.
yeah, I think, well, you never know. As I said earlier, it's nature, basically. So you have to accept what you have and do the best of what you can in the year to be able to save what is savable. Currently, we're still good. Too much rain, but we're managing to avoid most of the illnesses.
Mhm.
So, I'll have more news for you in September on that.
All right. Sounds good, Gilles. Well, thank you again. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Everybody, thanks for taking
Yeah.
part in the tasting. Hope you enjoyed it, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you very much, guys. Thanks.
Bye.